That look better? That might look better. I have like a halo on top of my head. Don't want that. Welcome to Love on Movies. Today we're going to talk about Winchester. It is October 30th, 2024, and this is a haunted house story. Winchester in other countries, in some other countries, are referred to as Winchester, the house that ghosts built. So I'm Anthony McDowell, and we're going to talk about this movie that was directed by the Spierig brothers, Michael Spierig and Peter Spierig. Writers Tom Vaughn, Michael Spierig, and Peter Spierig, and it stars Helen Mirren, Jason Clarke, and Sarah Snook. The U.S. release was February 2nd, 2018. The budget was $3.5 million. And the way movies work in the United States, and I don't know where else, but typically when you have a budget, double it for marketing, and then that's kind of the break-even point. And so the budget was $3.5 million. They need $7 million to break even. Opening weekend, they got $9 million. So they made their money in the first weekend, and then the box office they brought in $44 million. So this was a commercial success. Critics wasn't crazy about it. We'll talk about some of those from Fandango at home. I'll read some of those. I like those because they're short. You don't have to read a whole article. A lot of information I'm going to share today is either from IMDB or from Wikipedia. Most of it's from Wikipedia. This is information anybody can go see. There's nothing in here. All I did was kind of put some things together, and I'm doing this show with my own perspective and what's interesting to me about it. I'm apologizing in advance for the camera. I've got this camera for free. This is a no-budget podcast. No budget. I haven't spent any money. This camera that I'm using came from Western Governors University. I didn't graduate, but I took some classes there. And that's how I got this camera. And that's why I cut the light off, because it was just, when I turned it on, there was like a big ring on my head. I can see my face is really hot. I will, hot is, it's a TV term, is when you got a bunch of light on your face. I don't have makeup on or nothing like that. I'm going to learn as I go this technology stuff. Eventually I'll get a better camera. I'm intentionally using this microphone. Now, this is not the best mic I own. This is actually the cheapest mic that I own. But as I get better, I'll add better equipment. My best mic that I have is a Stellar X2. When I do a little bit of voice acting, I use that camera. But that's a little bit about the technology stuff and the no budget that I'm putting into this show in these early episodes. It's why I chose Winchester, in part, was because it's a movie that was not very well received critically. It did win some awards. We'll talk about that in a little while. But it wasn't the big awards. It wasn't like the Oscars. It wasn't SAG-AFTRA awards. It wasn't nothing like that. It was like sound and stuff. It was also just touch on that. It was nominated for 4 Razzies, and I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that bad a movie. I think it's a good movie to be what it was. It is a haunted house story. There's not a lot of haunted house stories that are good. They're just not. I like possession movies when it comes to scary movies. I think those are the best. But here's the plot per IMDb. Ensconced in her sprawling San Jose, California mansion, eccentric firearm heiress Sarah Winchester, played by Dame Helen Mirren, believes she is haunted by the souls of people killed by the Winchester repeating rifle. Now, this movie is based on a true story in the sense that Sarah Winchester really was a recluse. She did own the home in this film. She was rich from the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, which is now, it still exists, but it exists, somebody else bought it. It's now part of the Olin, O-L-I-N, the Olin Corporation. And some of the characters were real, but the story is completely made up. Some of the characters are completely made up. The character Eric Price, played by Jason Clarke, he did not exist in real life. They completely made him up from the movie, for the movie. They completely made him up for the movie. So now this is straight from Wikipedia. So anybody can find this. Go to Winchester's Wikipedia page. Checking the time, 5.5 minutes basically. Sarah Winchester is the widow of famed gun manufacturer William Winchester. Her husband's sudden death and the previous death of their child Annie have left her in grief. Having received more than $20 million in inheritance, Winchester convinces herself she is cursed by the ghosts of those who died at the hands of the Winchester firearms. After seeking advice from a medium, she begins building an enormous, seemingly never-ending mansion in San Jose, California. I've been there. It's a really cool house. That would eventually be named the Winchester Mystery House. The house is under constant construction, and Sarah's niece, Marion Marriott, say that 3 times real fast, lives in the house with her son Henry. At night, Henry is possessed by a mysterious entity. This movie is set in 1906. In 1906, the Winchester Company hires Dr. Eric Price. He did not exist in real life. Hires Dr. Eric Price to stay at the house and assess Sarah, believing she is mentally unfit to remain in charge of the company. Eric is grieving from the death of his wife, Ruby. I have a dog named Ruby. We just got her. She's a German Shepherd. She's a cutie. I got her put up right now, so she's not calmed down yet. She's only 6 or 7 months old. She's getting into everything. Eric is grieving from the death of his wife, Ruby, and is reliant on drugs. The drugs that he's on is laudanum, and I'm going to talk a little bit about laudanum towards the end of the show. He arrives at the house and has a ghostly vision that he believes is a side effect of the drugs he has taken. Later, he spots a ghost in the basement and witnesses a possessed Henry jump off the roof. Eric saves him. The next day, Eric begins to conduct his assessment of Sarah's mental well-being. Sarah admits her fear of ghosts and believes she can help them move on. She reveals that she knows about Eric's drug problem and confiscates his supply of laudanum. That night, Eric witnesses a seemingly possessed Sarah draw a plan for a new room. He is startled by an entity and flees back to his room. The next day, Sarah shows Eric that she keeps records of people killed by the Winchester rifles. It is revealed that Eric had actually been shot and killed by a Winchester rifle before being revived. According to the movie, he was dead for 3 minutes. And he keeps the refurbished bullet with him. Sarah explains how 13 nails keeps spirits sealed in rooms. A possessed Henry attempts to kill Sarah with a rifle, but is stopped by Eric and Marion. Realizing how violent this spirit is, Sarah sends her staff away and decides to personally remove the ghost from her home. Eric encounters a butler who reveals himself to be a ghost. He and Sarah identify the ghost as Benjamin Block, a Confederate States Army soldier who lost his 2 brothers in the American Civil War, killed by Winchester rifles. A devastated Ben proceeded to shoot up a Winchester office, massacring the workers before being shot dead by police. Ben has been the one possessing Henry. Ooh. The constructed room with the Winchester guns is the room where he was shot dead. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake, I'm going to talk about that, takes place. That really did happen, devastating the house and separating Eric and Sarah. In the chaos, a possessed Henry escapes his room and is pursued by Marion. Eric encounters several ghosts before seeing the ghost of Ruby, his wife. Not my dog. It is revealed that Ruby could see and hear ghosts, but was misdiagnosed as delusional by Eric. Depressed that he would not believe her, the unstable Ruby shot Eric before killing herself with a Winchester rifle. We'll take a pause there. Eric said she was delusional, so she got depressed and shot him and shot herself. She's at minimum crazy. Ruby's ghost confronts Eric, inspiring him to help Sarah. Eric reunites with Sarah, and they manage to trap Ben in the room. Marion and Henry are cornered by Ben's brothers. Ben attempts to murder Sarah, but the pair realizes that Ben is scared of the bullet Eric kept. Eric has been able to see the ghosts in the house due to his dying from that bullet beforehand. Eric uses the bullet in the rifle that Ben used in the shooting and banishes him. Henry and Marion are saved, and the other spirits return to the rooms. Eric pronounces Sarah sane, allowing her to remain in control of the company. Sarah announces her intent to build more rooms to help spirits. As the house is being repaired, the camera returns to the hall of boarded up rooms and catches a nail falling out of one of the boards that is stealing a spirit in a room. Ooh. So that plot took me a little over 5 minutes to read. I may have to, I'm a slow reader, so in future episodes, I may have to try to truncate that or something. I don't need to be spending 5 minutes reading the plot. That's really kind of more of a synopsis, though. We'll see how it goes. So let me pull up my notes so we can talk about this movie. So who was Sarah Winchester? She was born the real Sarah Winchester, not from the movie. The movie is start with it's completely fabricated, and we'll go from there. Sarah Winchester, born March 7th, 1839, died September 5th, 1922. Got married on September 30th, 1862 to William Winchester. So they got married during the Civil War. Civil War was 1861 to 1865. They got married in September of 1862. He died in New Haven, Connecticut on March 7th, 1881 of tuberculosis. They really did have a daughter named Annie Pardee Winchester, born on June 15, 1866, but she died within a month from marasmus. Now, I didn't know what marasmus was. Marasmus is a severe form of malnutrition. Really wish there was more information on her. They were rich. Why was she malnourished? How did that happen? I don't have the answer. If you know, let me know in the comments. There's only secondhand knowledge of the real Sarah, who in real life went by Sally. I got that. There's a bonus feature on Fandango at Home. So that's where I got that from. There's only secondhand knowledge of the real Sarah. And then also from that same bonus feature, the photo at the end of the film with her in the carriage dressed in black is the only known photograph of her. So a lot of portraits, a lot of where they've painted her, but there's only one photo. In the film, Sarah moved from New Haven, Connecticut to San Jose, California after seeking advice from a medium, but that is not true. What really happened, she made the move due to her health. A physician, not a medium, recommended the drier and warmer climate for her worsening rheumatoid arthritis. In real life, Sarah was an inventor, and she owned several patents, including, if you saw the intercom system in the movie, she invented that. She was also a real estate investor, and in fact, after the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, she didn't even live in the Winchester Mystery House anymore, or what we call the Winchester Mystery House. There are speculations that she was trapped in the home, but there's evidence that she was not. She actually referred to her home as, forgive me for pronunciation, Lanada Villa. I don't know if that's how you say it or not. Lanada, and then Villa, Villa, Lanada Villa. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. Maybe that's not correct, but there's a lot of words I don't say correct. So there's speculation she was trapped in the home, but there's a letter she had written to her lawyer indicating that she wasn't even at the house at the time of the earthquake. Instead, she was at her house in Atherton, California. Completely different. She was in a completely different house during the earthquake. After the earthquake, she lived on a houseboat for a while due to damages to many of her properties. And the houseboat wasn't at all impacted by the earthquake. It was on the water. But then in 1907, she bought a permanent residence at 44 Inglewood Lane. Now, I'm not sure where that is exactly, but it's not a villa. So she didn't even live in that house anymore, contrary to what the movie was saying and what the lore says, that really didn't happen. So this debunks the legends that she stayed building in this house 24/7 for years and years. I'll talk about the house itself and the damage and the repairs to it in a little bit. Something else I found interesting is to think of some historical context. This isn't all inclusive, just an interesting note. Sarah was not allowed to vote. Think about that. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified on August 18th, 1920. Sarah died September 5th, 1922. So maybe some sort of election occurred like early in the year. Usually our elections are in November. I don't know about the 20s. The point is you got a 2-year window there that she probably didn't vote. But given her health and her age, it's unlikely. And I mention it simply because she was rich. That's a big deal. On the same trip my wife and I took out there, we visited the Winchester Mystery House. We also visited the Hearst mansion out there, whatever, I can't remember off the top of my head what that's called. But he was heavily involved in politics. If you study William Randolph Hearst at all, they got their money from the gold rush, the California gold rush, and they didn't find gold, but they found silver. It immediately made them one of the richest people in the world. They bought a bunch of land and they started a printing company, and that company still exists. The Hearst. I didn't. It's not part of my notes, but if you look up William Randolph Hearst and his legacy, it's real fascinating. But Sarah Winchester was among the wealth. But according to Wikipedia, she didn't get involved in politics hardly ever. She wasn't meeting presidents or anything, and her attitude seemed to be that her endorsing someone wouldn't matter since she couldn't vote anyhow. So she stayed out of it. And as I'm recording, October 30th, 2024, our next president will be either President Donald Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris. This time next year, one of them will. This time next week, one of them will be announced as our president. So I just found that interesting. So now let's talk about the house. Lanata Villa, aka the Winchester Mystery Mansion. The Mystery House is located in San Jose, California, and this is why I chose to do this movie for the podcast, because I visited the Winchester Mystery House on February 18th, 2018, me and my wife. It was a bittersweet day because this was the first stop on our honeymoon. We had my wife and I eloped on December 12th, 2017 in Sevierville, Tennessee. And so if you're a Tennessean, if you know the gazebo in Sevier County behind the courthouse, that's where we got married. And she had some airplane miles that she wanted to use. And she said, how about California? And I agreed. And we had a wonderful time for the most part. But after we booked everything, she turned up pregnant. Now, if the doctor had told us not to go on the trip, we'd have canceled everything, wouldn't have thought nothing of it. The doctor cleared us to go on the trip. But while we were at the Winchester Mystery House, she had a second miscarriage. Now, while we were dating, she got pregnant as well. And ended up, after this trip, she actually had a third miscarriage and she switched doctors. She'd had one previously, but this had nothing to do with the trip. The miscarriage had nothing to do with the trip. She'd have had the miscarriage if she'd been at the house with her feet propped up. It's just one of those things. We didn't know it at the time, but she had a blood clot in her body that thought the pregnancy was a foreign object. And so her body sent blood clots that way, and that was causing her to have miscarriages. We didn't know it until later when she switched doctors and he ran some blood tests on her. But when I think of my visit, while I enjoyed the sights and the tour, I can't help but think of the sadness that we also felt that day. But wrapping up the sadness and getting back to the madness, the new doctor discovered her condition, and we have a baby girl that's 5 years old now. She's in kindergarten as we speak, and she runs this house. And I'll post pictures of our trip to the Winchester Mystery House on my Facebook page. You can find me at facebook.com at Van City McDowell. At Van City McDowell. You can find me on Instagram with the same handle, at Van City McDowell. Facebook, Instagram, and I stole that. I stole the idea. I don't even really know what Van City is. In retrospect, I'm wondering if it's Vancouver, which I have nothing to do with Vancouver. I've never been to Canada. I've been on the border of Canada, but I've always been on the U.S. side. My full-time job is I'm a trucker. And so I've been to northern Michigan quite a few times. I've seen Canada, but I've never been in it. I think that's what Van City is, but I stole it from Ryan Reynolds because Ryan Reynolds is Van City Reynolds. And then I'm also a fan of Joshua Jackson, and his is Van City Jax, Jax. So if it's good enough for those guys, it's good enough for me. At Van City McDowell, Facebook, Instagram. Give me a follow. Back to the house. In the film, the house is believed to be haunted by the victims of the Winchester rifle. In real life, it has been a tourist attraction since 1923, a year after Sarah Winchester's death. Many television shows, such as Ghost Adventures, have been to the Winchester Mystery House to investigate if it's haunted or not. Please check out those shows and come to your own conclusion. I'm not crazy about many of the ghost shows, but I like Ghost Adventures. There's just something about it. They put it together pretty good. But the Winchester Mystery House was not under construction for 38 years round the clock. Sarah took breaks from construction to rest, sometimes for months at a time, and to further emphasize the absurdity of the legends, the room that was purported to hold nightly seances with the spirits, and it did look really cool in the movie. But in real life, that was actually one of her gardener's bedrooms. So, according to former employees, and this is according to Wikipedia, Sarah did so much construction to express herself artistically. It wasn't for spirits. It wasn't trying to trick the spirits. It was to express herself artistically, and she had a big heart, and it was to keep workers employed. She was not a licensed architect, but she could work on her own house, and so it was a creative thing for her. Sarah is often depicted as superstitious and crazy instead of innovative and intelligent. When she was working her house, if the project wasn't working, then sometimes she'd just abandon that project. And so that's a minor reason why the house has crazy characteristics. But the primary reason is due to the aforementioned San Francisco earthquake of 1906. The house took extensive damage during the 1906 earthquake. The 7-story tower, most of the chimneys collapsed. One entire wing was destroyed, along with the 3rd and 4th stories. In real life, Sarah had the rubble removed and had little more done to the property after the earthquake. It left doors that opened to where balconies had once been, pipes protruding from what was once window boxes, and staircases that once led to upper floors suddenly ended. The lore about Sarah's madness actually began while she was still alive, and some of these stories about stairs to nowhere and whatnot started coming about after the 1906 earthquake, but well before her death. Note that the only real work done to the house after the earthquake was she added an elevator in 1916. So let's talk about the superstition and the madness and the lore. This next section is directly from Wikipedia. This is from Sarah Winchester's Wikipedia, though. So if you want to see this word for word, go to Sarah Winchester's Wikipedia. In 1908, so the earthquake happened in 1906. She's not living at the house anymore. In 1908, the first mention of angry spirits haunting Winchester appeared in the San Francisco Examiner, with rumors she was considering selling Lanata Villa. These stories spread to encapsulate all her properties. The rumors stated that if she sold any, she believed she would die. And there were hints she was involved with the occult. Now, I don't know what the occult was, but that's what it says. Despite these rumors, Winchester sold one of her Atherton homes, so she debunked it while she was still alive. But nonetheless, incorrect rumors spread about Winchester's houseboat, stating that she purchased the boat after the earthquake for fear of biblical flood. This is incorrect, since she purchased the houseboat 2 years prior to the earthquake because they were popular at the time. The rumors painted her as mentally unstable, filled with superstition, guilt, and fear. This next section is some of her former employees and a friend that are debunking all this lore. Fred Larson, who was Sarah Winchester's chauffeur, Ted Hansen, an employee's son who grew up at Lanata Villa, Frank Lieb, Sarah Winchester's lawyer, and Miss Henrietta Severs, Sarah's companion of many years, were all people who openly stated that Sarah Winchester was not superstitious, but was intelligent and kind. None of her former employees, servants, or relatives ever claimed she was mad or superstitious. And here's a statement from Roy Lieb, son of Winchester's lawyer Frank, in the summer of 1925. So remember, Sarah died in 1922. This is roughly 3 years later in 1925. Quote, Mrs. Winchester was a sane and clear-headed woman as I have ever known, and she had a better grasp of business and financial affairs than most men. The commonly believed supposition that she had hallucinations is all bunk, end quote. And I smiled when I read this because I live in Cleveland, Tennessee. And if you know much about Tennessee, you know that we love Dolly Parton around here. And I've heard Dolly in several interviews over the years say that she has the business mind that a man would have. And so when I read that, she had a better grasp of business and financial affairs than most men, I thought Dolly Parton. And I smiled because I love Dolly. So now let's talk about the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. This was a big deal. This is a major event. Changed the course of history. What Los Angeles is now could have been San Francisco. Because now this is me riffing. You can look it up, do your own homework. This is kind of how what I'm about to say is going to be kind of the foundation of what I'm going to say, and this is my opinion. But San Francisco, everybody was going to California to look for gold. And people were going to San Francisco. And that was a very big part of trade. I'll talk about that in a minute. It's part of what I've written out. But then there was the earthquake. And with the earthquake, they came some fires. And much of San Francisco got destroyed. So a lot of that trade went to LA. So we'll talk about that. This is a major event in American history. San Francisco earthquake of 1906. The 1906 earthquake preceded the development of the Richter scale by 3 decades. The most widely accepted estimate for the magnitude of the earthquake is 7.9. But the debate ranges from 7.7 to 8.3. They're guessing. They don't know. But it's between 7.7 and 8.3. Most people think it was 7.9. Either way, it was incredibly strong. The main shock of the earthquake lasted about 42 seconds. Shaking was felt from Oregon to Los Angeles and as far inland as central Nevada. Now, I'm not going to try to be technical because I I don't understand the technicalities. But according to Wikipedia, you can find all of this by typing in 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and maybe you can teach me something. Again, shoot me a message. My email address is amcdowell82@gmail.com. Email me anytime. You can also like my Facebook page and follow me on Instagram at VanCityMcDowell. But from what I read, there's a theory that the California gold rush played a part in this earthquake happening. Something about piling up sediment on the San Andreas fault line triggered smaller earthquakes for decades. But this was the big one that relieved the pressure. I don't understand it, but so take it with a grain of salt by all means, but that's how I understand it. Regardless, on Wednesday, April 18, 1906, at 5:12 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the coast of Northern California was struck by this major earthquake. The event is remembered as the deadliest earthquake in the history of the United States. More than 3,000 people died, and over 80% of San Francisco was destroyed. There's a scale called MMI. The MMI stands for something, but we'll just leave it MMI. It's a scale, and on this scale, San Francisco was rated a 9 of 9. So that was extreme. Whereas San Jose, the city the Winchester Mystery House is located in both real life and in the film, was rated 7 of 9, or violent. So San Francisco got hit on this scale. It was a 9 of 9. San Jose was a 7 of 9. So it was still, it was big. In the film, the earthquake's in the climax of the movie, but again, in real life, there's evidence, which is the letter to her lawyer, that Sarah wasn't even at the Lanata Villa home. She wasn't there. She's at the other one of her other ones. As bad as the earthquake and its aftershocks were, the fires that burned out of control were far more destructive. At least 80% of the total destruction was the result of the fires, which were caused by ruptured gas mains, destroying approximately 25,000 buildings on 490 San Francisco city blocks. I do not believe the Winchester Mystery Mansion caught fire all the way in San Jose. But this is a major historical event. If you visit San Francisco, like my wife and I did, you can still easily learn about this devastating earthquake. Even to this day, they still talk about it out there in San Francisco, at least in the touristy stuff. In the touristy stuff they do. I'm sure day to day when they're going to get their coffee down there, that their $35 coffee with their $45 muffin, that they're not talking about the earthquake. But if you go to the touristy stuff, they'll talk about it. The last thing about this earthquake I wanted to mention is something that is still relevant. It's still some bullcrap. And a version of it is happening right now, today, October 30th, 2024, in Western North Carolina. And that's issues with insurance. Most of the destruction in the city was attributed to the fires, since widespread practice by insurers was to compensate San Francisco properties from fire, but not from earthquake damage. Some property owners deliberately set fires to damaged properties to claim them on their insurance. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of insurance malarkey, but I point it out simply to say there will be stories, if they aren't airing already on TV, of insurance companies not wanting to pay for the homes in Western North Carolina from the destruction of Hurricane Helene. Just like they didn't want to pay the people of New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit. And that's the event that put this insurance tomfoolery on my personal radar. it's been happening for over a century. I saw it during Katrina, just on the news. I'm in Cleveland, Tennessee. Hurricane Katrina didn't affect me in my home at all. But this is 2000. I think it was 2006 when Katrina hit. So 18 years ago. That was a major hurricane. In 2006, if that's not in my notes, if that's the year, depending on the month, I was 23 or 24 years old. So I was pretty young at that time when Katrina hit. Maybe it was 2008, whatever it was. I was in my mid-20s when it hit. I'm 43 years old now. Back then, I was in my mid-20s. I'm an idiot now, but I wasn't as smart then as I am now. The little bit of knowledge that I've learned this past 20-ish years, almost 20 years. Katrina was the event that happened that put this insurance crap on my radar. I'm about to see it again with Helene, but this also was happening in 1906 in San Francisco with these earthquakes. I mean, to me, there should be a homeowner's policy, and that's it. There's no add-ons. I'm almost cussed, and this is a family show, because I really do get angry about this. There should be no add-ons. You get a policy to cover your house. That's the end of it. There's no flood insurance. There's no such thing as flood insurance or earthquake insurance or tornado insurance or farting insurance. There's no such thing. If Mother Nature destroys my house, pay it. Pay for the policy I paid for, which covers everything. Oh, I controlled myself. I'm not really that fired up because I caught myself before I did. I didn't let myself go there. There's no lawyers. There's no if-thens. There's no, your policy says, if my house ain't there anymore, that's what I got insurance for. Moving on. The last thing I want to talk about before I get out of here, as far as topics go, I'll do some quick hitters. As far as topics goes, I want to talk about laudanum. Now, I'm interested in drugs because I used to be a pharmacy technician. Now, my full-time job is I'm a trucker. But right before I became a trucker, I was a pharmacy technician for a retail chain. And I like learning about drugs. I got interested in learning about them. Pharmacy technician just doesn't pay nothing. So it's not worth doing. If you compare what I made as a pharmacy technician and what I make as a professional driver, it's not even close. But I'm also, so I'm a full-time trucker and I'm a part-time actor. And that's one reason why the realism versus the what they made up is, it fascinates me. I like to know what's real. And one of my favorite movies is Tombstone. And if you remember in Tombstone, Wyatt Earp's wife, I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but his wife is addicted to laudanum. And I've seen it in these older movies. They're not old movies, but they're set in like the Wild West, or this is in the early 1900s. This is past the Wild West, but it's still in that era where laudanum was a thing. And I'm like, I want to. This is my show. I can talk about whatever I want. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on laudanum. So that's the last thing I'm going to talk about before I get out of here. In Winchester, which is what we're covering, Dr. Eric Price, a fictional character made up specifically for the movie, is addicted to laudanum. And since I'm working on the material for the show, I decided to look it up. Does it still exist, or has it become obsolete? So here's what I learned about laudanum. Laudanum is a pain medication and a cough suppressant. The term laudanum refers to any combination of opium and alcohol. So as you remember from Winchester, Dr. Eric Price had a bottle of liquid laudanum, and he used a dropper to take that medication. During the late 18th and early 19th centuries, patients undergoing surgery were often administered laudanum and alcohol. So what I imagine what they were doing, and I think I saw this in Tombstone, if I'm not mistaken, where Bill Paxton's character got shot. Is you give them a little bit of laudanum, then you give them some whiskey, and then you give them something to bite on, and then they had their hands restrained and bodies held down while the operation was performed. Suicide by laudanum was common in the mid-19th century. A single dose between 100 milligram and 150 milligram can be fatal. Until the 20th century, laudanum was sold without a prescription, so it was extremely common. I couldn't find the specifics for this podcast, and I'll keep digging for my own curiosity, but there wasn't really a fear of drug abuse until World War I, which was July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918. The context here is that the events of the fictional story of this film, Winchester, occurred in 1906. So it's interesting they addressed drug abuse in this movie for this time period. It's relevant because are the ghosts real or are they his hallucinations? That's sort of what drives the plot. And I just find that interesting. In the 20th century, the pharmaceutical industry began synthesizing various opioids, such as, I'm not going to try to say this first one. I will try to say it. Propoxyphene. That sounds right. Propoxyphene. Oxymorphone, way easier to say. Oxycodone, as well as the creation of codeine and morphine, were all preferable to laudanum, since a single opioid could be described for different types of pain rather than the cocktail of laudanum, which contains nearly all of the opium alkaloids. Consequently, laudanum became mostly obsolete as an analgesic, since the principal ingredient is morphine, which can be prescribed by itself. You don't need all the wham of laudanum when you can just get the morphine out of it. Today, laudanum is prescribed almost exclusively as an anti-diarrheal, although the drug is occasionally prescribed off-label for treating pain and neonatal withdrawal syndrome. Laudanum is a class 2 narcotic, and it is available by prescription in the U.S. under the generic name opium tincture. It's actually timing out pretty good. Just crossed 43 minutes. Maybe 5 minutes for the plot ain't that bad. Something else I found interesting. This really did happen to me. For the Oregon Trail fans watching, laudanum is the drug we needed on the trail that would have prevented us from dying of dysentery, which is another term that I never took the time to look up. A few years ago, I really did get really sick. I was throwing up, my teeth hurt, I felt rough, upset stomach, headache. That's not the order of it, but I had all that. The doctor looked at my symptoms and the sequence of how I got progressively worse. So it started with an upset stomach, and I was, pooping. And then the sequence of events at that time of how things just kept piling on, he determined that I was dehydrated. He said that I pooped more than I drank, so I had to drink Pedialyte, and I felt fine the next day. But here's the thing. I didn't really know that you could poop yourself to death. I thought it was just an expression. We've all heard it. We've all said it. Turns out, dysentery Bloody diarrhea. How about that? Bloody diarrhea. You really can die from pooping yourself to death. So let me do these reviews real quick. Did it on Fandango at Home. Critics give it a 13%, which is considered rotten, and the audience score is 32%, which is looks like it's a spilt popcorn. The user rating for the community of the Fandango at Home folks is 4.1. There's a lot of 4s in the user ratings. I've looked at other films. There's a lot of 4s. This is rated PG-13. I should have said it at the beginning of the show. But let's just go through some of these reviews real quick. I like Fandango at Home and their reviews because they're short. So this lady from the New York Times says, ho-hum apparitions appear and disappear without a trace. Miss Mirren and her representatives are probably hoping the movie will do likewise, and she gave it a rotten score. The apparitions were mostly practical. I thought they were good. This one is from a dude from New Yorker. He gave it a fresh rating. In Winchester, the Spearigs have defeated Confederacy. Okay, I didn't get that. They went sour Southerners. Okay, that's what you want to go with it. It's your review. This is a dude that gave it a rotten score from Rolling Stone. It shouldn't happen to anyone, much less a dame, not a movie of such barreling awfulness that it strands the great Helen Mirren in a gothic house of cards that collapses on actors and audience alike. Most of these are rotten. I'm going to scroll down to this dude from RogerEbert.com. It's the last one I'll read. He gave it a fresh score. What Winchester lacks in originality, its creators amply make up in execution. The word amply stumped me because I wanted to say amplify. And I'm like, that don't make sense. What Winchester lacks in originality, its creators amply make up for in execution. So if I'm going to give it a score, and if I'm just going with kind of what they did, and I say, is it rotten? Is it not rotten? Right? Is it fresh? I would go fresh. I liked it. You're not going to go into this movie thinking it's The Exorcist. It's not that good. But to be a haunted house movie, I think it's worth watching. It's not a movie I would watch over and over and over and over and over. It's not quotable. It's not really memorable. I think what's most interesting about it is you can visit the house. And when we went out there back in 2018, the movie hadn't came out yet, but at the end of our tour, there was the trailer. They played the trailer for the movie while we were there. And I'm like, well, I've got to buy it when it comes out. And that's what's cool about it. Some of it, the exterior stuff was shot on location in San Jose, California. Most of it was filmed in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia. Yeah, and the fact that you can go to the Winchester Mystery House, I think that's cool. The fact that Sarah Winchester really was an interesting person. She's played in a fictitious manner. That's okay. What's in the movie is not real, but it does help. It helps. It helps to know that this was a real person. And reading about her, she's just as interesting as she is in the movie. She's not crazy like she was in the movie. Her house isn't really haunted, but it's really cool. You can go there. You can buy Winchester guns. You can buy Winchester ammunition. Let me rephrase that. I don't know if Winchester got bought as a brand. I'm not 100% sure they still make the guns anymore. I should have looked that up. I didn't really talk about guns, but I don't buy Winchester guns. I buy Winchester ammunition, though, because the ammunition is pretty cheap. And so I really don't know if they have guns or not. A lot of my guns, you know, I've got a Springfield 40. I've got a Smith & Wesson 307 revolver. The 307? Whatever it is. I got a Smith & Wesson revolver. I got a lot of guns. I like Winchester ammunition. So I left out so much. I didn't talk about ghosts. I didn't talk about the firearms. You can look that up. They do exist. You can look up Laudanum. Laudanum really exists. A lot of stuff in the movie is really, really fun. And there was so much other content that I could have discussed, like ghosts. I'll talk about them in future episodes. Guns. I'd really like to have someone that's like a gun enthusiast. I'm a gun owner. I'm not a gun enthusiast. I don't go out and spend half a paycheck on bullets. I'm not that guy. We got plenty of bullets. Somebody who ever breaks in our house, we're covered. But I don't just I don't read the magazines. And I thought about including it in the show, but as I was reading it, a lot of the difference what you're seeing, I'm seeing this. It just unfroze. The calibers are different. The mechanisms in it are different. And as I was reading it, I'm like, there's no way I can talk about that on a podcast I couldn't even write that out and read it. And it makes sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to me, I can't talk about it on the show. Maybe if I do a John Wick, and I will do John Wick at some point, somebody knows something about guns can come on the show and talk more about guns. But yeah, I find Sarah Winchester fascinating. I find her house fascinating, and the lore that intertwines them is really cool. And so that's really it. That's my coverage of Winchester. There are many other podcasts out there. Enjoy those, but enjoy mine too. And send me an email at amcdowell82@gmail.com. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at VanCMcDowell. And I intend to post every Wednesday or every other Wednesday. So we'll be looking forward to that. Until then, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.